it was followed by heavy bombing the next day and Japanese land attacks from the west across the Matanakaw River, that was our western anchor of the small lodgment that we had, and from the south again, down what had been called Edson's Ridge.
All right, now you, at this point, you still had time to serve on Guadalcanal. What transpired during the rest of your time on that island?
Some heavy fighting along the Matanakaw River, some heavy fighting to the south. I think one of the most fearful experiences I had there was going out on night outposts, 100, 150 yards in front of the lines. These outposts spotted, especially to the south, and what was an open field before the ridges began, the ridges and the jungle. And there were two-man holes. There wasn't a tinker's chance in hell that you'd get back if the Japanese made a night attack. And that was a fear I had difficulty with every night. Be two men in the hole, one would sleep a couple hours, you'd be on. You'd go out at dusk and come back at dawn. Then there was a great deal of patrolling. We seemed always to be moving. I don't remember the vast periods of time. What I do remember is like a patch here and there in a blanket or a quilt, something of significance. I remember the morning, or a morning shortly after that heavy night shelling, which wasn't unusual. We were often shelled, or quite often shelled at night, but never by two battleships, followed by 3 or 4 cruisers. Usually it was some cruisers, destroyers, submarines. And then they got they landed land artillery. They landed artillery rather and began shelling us from the land. Shelling the airstrip. But anyone who was anywhere near the airstrip, whether in the coconut groves that you saw there in that picture in the Life magazine, their aim wasn't the best, and those shells fell in unusual places. They were firing their version of about the 155 millimeter. That was our largest land-based piece of artillery. Theirs were really howitzers. And they were firing them more to be an aggravation and to create fear and disrupt everything onto the airstrip. Their aim wasn't the important thing. It was just to upset and keep us unsettled and they were sure it's successful in that. There was fighting and all. And then in November, there was a great sea battle that took place. Again, you'll see Savo Island that you're familiar with. Well, in that strait between Guadalcanal and Tulagi and Gavutu and Tanambogo and Florida, there was this great sea battle. November, I think it was November something 8, 9, 10, something like that. Went on for a couple days and a couple of nights, and a third day, and our Navy prevailed. The Japanese lost the battleship, the HEI. We could see that this action took place at night, and you could see. You could just you see this tremendous flashes, and we got to be able to determine what was lightning on the horizon and what were gun flashes. And to differentiate between thunder and the gunfire roll, the roll of the echo and the reverberations of that. That was a big win for our Navy. And the battleship Washington participated. I just know this. We knew nothing.
What was your reaction as Marines on shore?
We just knew that, Jesus, there was really hell going on out there.
You couldn't tell who was winning?
No, we didn't. I told you way at the very beginning, the night of August 9th, in the Battle of Savo Island. That's a story worth reading about the boldness of the Japanese commander Mikawa. That's when, if he had continued, he'd have knocked out the whole invasion fleet. As it was, he took down four cruisers, and my brother's was one of them, the Vincennes. So they were really in more or less command of the sea. And it was all the ships that brought the raiders up and that took us to Tulagi, and that took us from Tulagi to Guadalcanal somewhere around the 17th, 18th of August. They were all gone. They were all down within a month of the landing. Those 4 World War I cut-down destroyers to fast transport of the raiders. There was the Gregory, the Calhoun, the McEwen, and the Little. And they were all gone in about a month or 5 weeks. Anyway, there was a lot of action that took place after the shelling, and it tapered off at the end of about the 3rd weekend. For us, about the 3rd, 4th week in November, and the Army relieved us about the 10th to 15th of December, 42.
So you were actually there almost 4 months.
We were a little over
on
4
Guadalcanal.
months. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that must have been pretty stressful. You must have been thrilled to finally be leaving. Do you remember your feelings at the time?
You know, honestly, all I remember, and I think this is fairly accurate, we were pretty, I'm not sure I can find the right words. We were pretty, a combination of being stoic, just feeling whatever comes, we'll handle it. We got no place to go. And I think I said to you once before, Eileen, all this baloney about for God and country is just that. We were trying to stay alive. That was number one for us, you, me. And then once that is accomplished, it's for everybody. It's for the next guy, because you can't, because you need him as he needs you. And then there's a sense of what I think you would call, and I've had a hard time finding this, but it's come, and that's honor. To accept your responsibilities and your obligations to the unit, to yourself, to be worthwhile, to fill your shoes with merit.
Ted, when the Army relieved you, where did you go?
We boarded ship and went to Australia.
And was that for the purpose of some R&R?
We were there for, I think, about 9 months, and the division was pretty sick.
Where did you go in Australia?
First to Brisbane, a camp outside of Brisbane, and it was an awful place. It was in a swamp, and it was for a division that was loaded with malaria. It was a bad place to be. The division surgeon came down to that camp one day, and we were gone 10 days later. He said, "You got to get these guys the hell out of there." So, because honestly, the officers all went to Brisbane. We were 30 or 40 miles outside of Brisbane. No transport except that which you could thumb from the Army. And we drank everything and sent out foraging parties during the day. It was like Coxey's bonus army. And we had loaded weapons. And we were the closest thing to an armed rabble as Marines could be. So they.
Now, was it a camp and were there barracks,
it was a camp in tents, and it was wet, and it was in jungle-like conditions, and that was December, hot. That's the Australian winter. So we were in pretty poor shape, and we got aboard ship and went to a beautiful place, Melbourne. And we were there until late November, December 43, and division was rebuilt, and it was correctly called Arbacanalia. We have to understand. We have a little bit of background. The Australian divisions had been in North Africa. Great fighters, those people. Boy. They came home, one division. It was only home for a month, and I sent them north to New Guinea. So their girls hadn't seen young men for a long time. And so we were welcomed. We were welcomed also as their savior, because that's what they viewed, right or wrong, that's what they viewed, stopping the Japanese advance there in the Solomons. The beautiful, beautiful country. Jesus, they treated us just beautiful. But when the Aussies came home, you know, from the Mideast, and found many of their women, their girls, with Americans, there were some bad times until they shipped the Australians north again to New Guinea, and there were quite a few marriages between Aussies and Marines.
On Melbourne, where did you stay?
We were in a camp about 30, 40 miles south of Melbourne, at a place called Mount Martha. It was right on, with hilly country, pretty. It was a former Australian army camp, fine barracks, and it was right on what reminded many of us, like it was right on like the Connecticut shoreline, Lyme, Niantic, that kind of place. And right outside our camp was a little town called Frankston. And there was a hotel there, and it was, and a pub or two or three, and ice cream places and shops. And the train stopped just a few miles away, the train that ran to Melbourne.
Now, in this time that you were at both Brisbane and Melbourne, did you have duties, military duties, or were you basically on leave and free to come and go?
No. When we got to Melbourne, and after maybe 3-4 weeks of getting settled in, they immediately began to rebuild the division. Replacements came from the States, and we began the usual drill and then field exercises. But for the most part, honestly, Eileen, for several months, 3-4 months, that was pretty modest. And we were given a hell of a lot of leave. Then the division was rebuilt. We began a lot of field stuff. We boarded ship in late November, early December of 43, and started north again.
Did you know where you were going?
I don't recall knowing where we were going until we were well, let's see. We remember we landed at a place called Oro Bay for some exercises. And then I think we learned we were going to Cape Gloucester, which was on New Britain Island, which was north of New Guinea. And at that time, the old breed was under Douglas MacArthur. We didn't like him much. There was a song that came out of Guadalcanal that was sung to the tune of The Road to Mandalay. On the road to Gizo Bay, where the Jap flotilla lay, we know they'll soon be coming across Iron Bottom Bay. Take me somewhere east of Lunga, where the best ain't like the worst, where there ain't no Doug MacArthur, and a Marine can slake his thirst. On the road to Gizo Bay. Gizo Bay was a place where the Japanese staged to the northeast, up in the Russell Islands or up at Kolombangara, Bella Lavala, somewhere up there. Maybe in the Russells, or New Georgia, I think. A long chain of islands going all the way up to Revolt. Anyway, that showed that we didn't like MacArthur too much. But we were under him, and so he wanted that island neutralized, I guess. We didn't like him also because, understand, we were going north to land again, and we were aboard ship at Christmas time. You know, I'll be home for Christmas. They were playing those songs over the intercom, and there was a lot of sentiment, longing to be home, thinking that we might have gone home. And of course it was all laid off on MacArthur, under whose command we were, unfairly. But we landed up at Cape Gloucester. I think it was a couple days after Christmas. 40.
Must have been 43.
43. And that began that campaign that in itself lasted another 4 months. That was it was not as diseased as the Solomons, but in all honesty, that was a more primeval place.
So after you'd already been on Guadalcanal for 4 months, you now landed at Cape Gloucester
And we were there
for the next 4 months? What was the landing like?
The landing was easy. There was no opposition. We overran an airstrip and gave MacArthur the airstrip as his Christmas gift. But there was one thing I recollect. We'd run across this, or taken this airstrip, and it really wasn't much. It was like a dirt strip. There were all kinds of Japanese aircraft parked along it, shot all to hell. I don't think the strip was much used, if at all. And we'd taken the strip, we'd run across it, and we were in a line of skirmishers, and we were on the far side of the strip, on the island side of the strip, not the water side of the strip. And at that time, I was a rifleman, and we had in Australia been issued the new Garand rifle, the gas-fired.
So you didn't use the VAR anymore?
No, I'd made corporal in Australia, so I had a squad.
So was it the Garand M1?
Yes. And I disassembled the M1, my rifle, because it was full of dirt and mud and sand, and then all of a sudden the mortars started coming in. Small mortars, but they were walking them up along the edge of the strip, and we sensed that. We had to get the hell out of there. But my rifle, the springs and the bolts and everything, were in my lap. So I scooped them up in my hand and took off and just hoped the hell I wouldn't drop anything.
Or need to fire it.
And we got off the strip and into the jungle and in a ditch or a cut somewhere. And I literally put that piece together from memory. Fast forward a year, let's see, that was 43. Fast forward 43, 44, 6 months. Training replacements. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Can remember pleading, persuading the need, and this is what I know we did for those replacements. You see, when we were assigned, we came home in the summer of 44, and we wanted to get assigned to a Navy yard someplace, you know, where you get the city, the liberty, the booze, the women, the steaks and the eggs and all that stuff. And we got assigned Camp Lejeune, training replacements. Eileen, we thought we were the world assholes because we were assigned. That wasn't true. After a bit, we realized that we could help these kids. We could teach them to crawl lower. We could teach them all the uses of their helmet, which wasn't just on their head. We could teach them the use of different stuff to help combat chiggers and ticks and all this, and we could teach them. And this is how I can remember. I used to blindfold them time after time. You got up and strip their weapon down. Now you put it together. And I remembered running with the guts of that weapon in my hand, with the mortars coming down close to our rear, and literally putting it together as I had been taught. And I can remember with those replacements, I used to think that was a bunch of baloney. I said, you guys don't understand. You're going to put this thing together. You have to stay here until midnight because it may save your ass sometime. And after a while, I really think, and I don't think this is sentiment, I think that those guys that we were training to go over his replacements, places in the 5th and 6th divisions that went to Iwo and Okinawa, that just maybe we helped them a little bit. And we didn't feel like the world dunderheads after a bit, because
because I'm sure you helped save many lives with that training.
we taught them to shoot straight.
Go back to Cape Gloucester. Now, after you're running with your rifle in pieces in your hand, what happened then?
We were I don't remember that there's a big blank sometimes. The next thing I recall there was I don't know whether that was day 3, 4, 5, 6. We were at the foot of this very small but steep hill, and we were lying at the foot of it behind in the scrub. And the hill was naked. Just a few stumps remained. The trees had been destroyed by shelling. The earth was a reddish yellow color, and it was slippery as hell because it had been raining on and off there. Heavy monsoon-like rains. And one or two of our guys were hit and either walked or crawled to the rear. The word came from below, we had to take that hill. And our guys said, bullshit, we're not going up that hill. There's no cover. There's no cover. So I was the squad leader. Had to take the hill. I don't know. I'm not into stuff that's much, but I knew we had to go. So I ran along behind our squad, and some of the other men too, not our squad but others, were kicking them in the boots, in the soles of their shoe. So we got to go, you know. We're not gonna go. You go. I said, we're going up the hill because we got to go. That's all. So I said, after running twice along the line of them, kicking them in the shoes and saying, come on, we got to go. I said to the guy next to me, look, we got to go. When I get up and start to the left, you get up and go to the right. Just do it and they'll all come. And we did.
And did they come?
And they all came. They all came, not only our squad and extended, but the next squad to the left followed our lead. We went up the hill. It was hard, and we got to the top. Half of it was so steep. I reckon that hill must have been almost 30, maybe 30 degrees, 30, 40 degrees. And it was wet and slick, hot. We got to the top and people just slumped down. We got sorted out and I had them form a kind of perimeter, and we just lay there, and I'll be goddamn, we must have been there an hour. Nothing happened, no word from below, nothing. The word came up, okay, come down the hill, we're moving out to another place. The unexplainables of war. The next thing I remember, I don't remember home. I got typhus, scrub typhus. Gloucester was a place that rained constantly. And then the sun would come out and everything would steam. It's just like the heat that we have had this summer. We were patrolling in these cooney grass fields. The cooney grass was six feet or so high. Very, very hot. Was only about 7 points off the equator, I think. That's hot. We'd roll up our path through the leggings away. We were supposed to wear them. We learned there was a reason for it. But to be cooler, we'd throw the leggings away and roll up the pants, you know. The coney grass fields were full of rodents. The rodents carried lice, fleas, mites. They carried what was called there'd been a patrol out, and they came back with some captured Japanese officers' papers, and I know the scuttlebutt was there's a strange disease here called scrub typhus that's bad. Well, I got it. About 7 of us got it. And your temperature skyrockets 105. You don't last long at 105. It just burns everything. The headaches were enormous, and you broke out into a rash, kind of like scarlet fever. Anyway, I just don't know for a long period of time what happened. I came to in a beautiful iron bed with sheets. I do remember one time in the bowels of that was in Milne Bay, New Guinea. I'd been evacuated. And I do recall once coming to while in this LST and I was all off by myself because that's a highly contagious disease. And the rest wounded, sick, but I wondered, why am I isolated?
So the next thing you
No, there was this. I came to in this bed, and shortly thereafter, honest Eileen, this is one of the most beautiful recollections of a nurse appeared, and I can see her to the day like I'm sitting across from you. Her arms from me. She said, Ted, you're awake. We thought we lost you. Can you imagine? Well, you don't forget something like that. Was just absolutely.
So that was a hospital back in Australia?
No, it was a hospital. It was an army hospital in Milne Bay, New Guinea. The Aussies had held Milne Bay from the Japanese, and MacArthur was pushing the Japanese back up the island of New Guinea to the north, to the west, And this fine hospital, anyway, after I recovered, and it was a long recovery, the officer in charge called me in one day and said, "You know, Ted, we're going to send you home. You don't have to go back up there." He didn't call me. He said, "You know, Cummings, we're going to send you home. You don't have to go back up there." He said, you've, I guess he said, "You've done enough. You can go home." Geez, I was, go home. This was sometime, must have been in February of 44.
How long did you stay at the hospital?
I was there about 5-6 weeks. I said to him, I said, "Sir, I just got to think about that." He said, "Come back in the morning. We'll send you home." But you know, Eileen, I thought to myself, Jesus, I can't do that. All those guys that I was with that have been through a hell of a lot more than me, and I couldn't go home when I could go back. So I went back the next day and I said, I just can't do that. So they sent me back up and I joined the unit again.
Back on Camp Gloucester?
Yeah.
Gloucester?
At this time they had moved way up the coast and in a blocking position across the trail to intercept the Japanese that were coming that were moving east, trying to get to their bases to the east. And when I get back, they said, "What the hell are you? You're the biggest fool that was ever born to come back up here." You know, you're such.
But they were glad to see you, though. So you returned to your same unit, and
Yeah.
your same buddies, and the same
Yeah.
position?
The same people. And just one last story that I do recall. I think they were testing, I said to you before, the Marine Corps has a way of doing that. I guess all services do. They test the devil out of you. So they'd send me out on patrols to set up ambushes to catch these Japanese remnants of the Japanese. They had been demolished back there at Cape Gloucester. And so this position on this place called Tallahassee on the Willamette Peninsula, jutting up out of the north coast of New Britain Island, was across the main trail. And you got to understand, these are primitive places, these islands. The islands of New Britain and New Guinea and all of those, whole Solomon Island chain down to Guadalcanal and on to the New Hebrides and New Caledonia that were French possessions, some of them, and they, like New Caledonia, and they were a little bit more developed. Anyway, we went out with a squad one day, this one I recollect, and we came to this native village we were sent out to find any other trails and to set up ambushes in hopes of catching some Japanese soldiers coming up. The commanding officer said, "We want prisoners. Get me some prisoners." We came to this opening in the jungle, and there was a village in this jungle. The jungle very, very heavy. And there were maybe a half a dozen huts, grass huts, up on stilts with, rickety wooden stairs going to the opening. But there was nobody in the village. It was empty. So we knew something was up. This village was plainly occupied, but there was nobody there. So said, and the trail ran out from it going west. So I said to another guy, "You come with me and we will go in this one," and sent two other guys to begin, and we were going to look into each one of these huts. We sent the other men out in a kind of perimeter for defense, and we began to go in these huts, and we went in the very first one we went in, and the door was closed. We kicked open the door and went in, and there, sitting on the table like an ancient Japanese holy man, was this Japanese sitting there cross-legged on this table with a sack, a cloth over him, and he was bearded, and his hands were up, and in one of his hands was a rusted, looked like a sickle. "Jesus," said to the other fellow. We looked around. He was the only person in the... I said, "I'm going to knock that sickle out of that blade out of his hand." I said, "If he comes after me, you just shoot him." I said, "For Christ's sakes, make sure your aim is right." Because so we motioned, knocked it out of his hand, motioned him, get off the table, get down. He did. Strange. About this time, I heard a lot of shouting outside. "Kill him," we heard. So we moved out quickly with the guy in front of us, this Japanese shuffling. Outside, we saw men raising their weapon, one in particular, almost up to his shoulder. Looked off to the left. There were these two natives, and in between was a naked Japanese. You could see he was about from here to the end of this building, covered with sores. Kill him, shoot the gooks too," because that's what they called. At that time, I knew less than I know now, which doesn't say much, but English American superiority, we called everyone who wasn't like us gooks, because we didn't know any better. We were fools, okay? Kill him, kill the gooks too. It started across from the shack, across the clearing, and these guys were raising their rifles, and I think I said to them, Eileen, "God damn it, you shoot him and I'm going to shoot you. Put those down. Put those weapons down." Because I knew our mission was to get prisoners. Here was a prisoner. Nothing heroic about that. There's a prisoner. And I said to one of the guys, throw a poncho over that poor bastard. And at this time, the two natives just melted away into the jungle. And that poor thing was standing there. So the guy went up, dropped the poncho over him, and took him and the other fellow that had come out of the hut. And three of our people, I said, you get these two guys back to the captain. He wanted prisoners, now he's got two. If they give you any trouble, shoot them. If not, you get them back there. And no faking, you get them back. We're to get prisoners. And the rest of us went on, and they went off, and the rest of us went down the trail and set up an ambush. And when I got back, I recall a fierce guy, hell of a fighter, Jesus. His name was Red Mike Mitchell. He said to me, you goddamn you, he said, you SOB, why did you bring those people back here? They're just taking food out of our mouth. Why didn't you kill them? He meant it, of course. He wasn't. So they got on me pretty fierce for a while, and I just let it go. The captain wanted prisoners. He got a couple.
Was that towards the end of your time at Cape Gloucester?
Mm.
What do you recall of Cape Gloucester after that?
I don't. I just know we did more patrolling, and finally I remember the rains were very heavy there. It seemed to always be wet. And we were relieved from New Britain Island sometime in I guess about April or May rather. And
this was May of '44?
Yeah, and moved off to the Russell Islands. And can you imagine this? We were transported back to the Russell Islands for rehabilitation. And they sent us back to a place. We couldn't believe it when we got ashore. There was nothing there, except they put us in a coconut grove that stunk from rotting coconuts. Nothing. We had to build the camp, clean the coconuts, erect the tents. It was typical Marine Corps.
How long were you at this camp for R&R?
I was fortunate to be one of those who, there must have been a lottery. I don't know how we were chosen to go home, but I was one of those that was chosen to
fairly early on.
Mm.
What were the casualties? Do you recall on Cape Gloucester for your unit?
No, I don't. The casualties were not too heavy for the whole division. On I think only maybe about 500. That is killed. I don't know about wounded. I really don't.
Ted, before we go on, now you get shipped home back to the United States, and before we continue with what life was like back there, I want to ask you some questions about daily life while you were both on Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester. When you were overseas and in the field like that, how did you stay in touch with your family?
V-mail. There was a small form that was issued, as I remember, and I may be wrong. V-mail, small. Seems to me it was one of these self-mailing things where you could send a short note, and it was supposed to get through more quickly. Or you could write a little longer letter, but you couldn't say much because they were heavily censored. So you sent back letters about pretty warm here, and things are going okay. Could be better, this, kind of thing.
Did you receive mail while you were out in the field?
I don't remember. I'm sure we did. I don't remember. Just as an aside, to show you, to go back to the girl, my mother knew how intense we were. When we got to New Zealand in June of '42, she sent me a letter that was in effect a Dear John letter. She said, I thought that you should see this clipping. It was a clipping about this girl marriage to this other fellow.
This was a girl you had been dating?
Yeah, and she sent me this announcement of her engagement or marriage or something. And we were in a New Zealand camp. This was prior to going north to the Solomons, to Guadalcanal and Tulagi and those places. So that was pretty much of a shock. However, I think that I rationalized that pretty well. I said, what the hell? Pretty girl, liked to make love, wanted to be wanted, wanted to be looked after, wanted company, liked to laugh. What the hell? I don't know what's going to happen to me. I can't blame her for that. I think I actually handled it that way. I like to think I did anyway. But my mother sent me that clipping. And just this past week, I went over to Borders Books and I got a disc of Vera Lynn. Now, Vera Lynn was a British songstress who was so revered in Britain and in the whole Commonwealth during the war that she was, I don't know, she became Dame Vera Lynn. And I remember her singing White Cliffs of Dover, When the Lights Go On Again, We'll Meet Again, in both Australia and then a year later, after the Solomon Islands, when we were rebuilding in Australia. So I got her, I'd heard on television that Dame Vera had a release of these songs, and that in Britain they had outsold the Beatles' releases. Well, that's a great deal of sentiment there. She was strictly a British songstress, very little feeling. That's Britain. That's a lot of the British model. And but she so expressed in their typical way, the feelings of the time that they stay. I'm glad that I was able to get that.
Ted, what was the food like? Both on Guadalcanal and at Cape Cod.
There wasn't much of it. Most of the time we had 2 meals a day. I honestly don't remember. The number of hot meals I can barely remember. We lived mostly on canned rations. That was pork and beans, little cans like the hash, beef stew, crackers. This is before there were those balanced diets that were put out in all the boxes and all that stuff. It was pretty fundamental. Coconuts, if we hadn't had the captured Japanese rice, we'd have been in deep crap. Stuff didn't get into us. Guadalcanal was a siege. We took the place, they wanted it back, they came after it. They built an airfield, they wanted it back. They tried to get it back. For a while, through the middle of October, through that time of the battleship shelling, it was all hit and run, hit or miss for stuff coming in there. Though there were some places where they were getting 3 meals a day, and others were getting 2 hot. But the troops of the line, always moving, work parties, patrolling, digging in deeper to protect yourself from the land shelling, the sea shelling, the constant bombing. Water was from the streams or from the Lister bags. We lived cooked out of our helmets and all this stuff, heating up the can. I don't think I'm overdoing it. We didn't have a hell of a lot of food, and only for a while. Couple of August, September, most of October. That's why it was, with the intense heat and the movement, always on the go. It wasn't any surprise that you lost 20, 25 pounds. So guys that went in at 125 came out at 100. That's how it was with me.
What about other supplies, things like ammunition, clothing?
We had the ammunition. We had the artillery and the ammunition, and we had those planes on the unsinkable aircraft carrier. Those flyboys were something. Jesus.
Ted, did you do anything special for good luck?
No, but we did something special. Every night that we could, Walter Stewars, who was a corporal, big 6'2" or 3" Polish guy from Holyoke, thin as a rail, very quiet. When he said something, you better listen up. We'd sit in the ground with our backs against the coconut log and play a game. You know this one, Walter. And I'd hum or whistle da 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 da, and the melody. And Walter would say, "Oh, I know that one. That's Ted Weems. Perry Como is the singer, and Elmo Tanner is the whistler in this particular song, which just comes to mind. My Silent Love was the name of it, from the 30s, the late 30s. Okay, your turn, Walter." And then he'd sing something, and we'd play those games. And we'd play them for maybe half an hour, smoke a couple of cigarettes, and that would be it. But it would be not often enough so that they became meaningful. That was a real chunk of back home, transported through the music and the feeling, the naturalness of it.
Ted, how did you handle the pressure and the stress of the combat?
I learned through the death of a friend, of which I was somewhat responsible, and the fact that I had been cowardly for a few seconds to see that, to recognize it for what it was, a great flaw in myself. And his death gave me the strength to manage fear. And I became a better person for it. Took them up the hill. It was always the fear. That sweeping fear that from the groin up through your trunk, and you had to, it was there. And you had to manage that. Not going to go away. You had to manage it. To do. And that's what you did.
What did you do for entertainment other than sing to each other and try to figure
That's
out?
all.
That was basically it.
That we had nothing to. Honest, Eileen, I don't. You mentioned about clothes. We wore the clothes out, and then we'd get. I don't know where the hell we got the other clothes.
Did you ever get to see any USO shows while you were overseas?
Not on places like Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, New Britain Island. In the Russells, after the second campaign in New Britain, when our camp that's the place we went, the stinking rat-infested coconut groves, we made it into something neat. Bob Hope, Francis Langford, and Jerry Colonna came. And Les Brown and his band of renown. That was really, I thought the island was going to sink. There were so many guys on that hillside. Jesus. Bob Hope, Jerry Colonna, Francis Langford. She was, that's what made Vera Lynn, she went, Vera Lynn, the British singer, she went where the troops were, not only in Europe, India, Burma. Well, that was the one USO show that I remember.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Yeah, one night Walter Soares and I were playing that game. All of a sudden we heard a dull roar. And we both looked toward the airfield. We were bivouacked in the coconut grove.
Now, where was
this? This was on Guadalcanal, and we were bivouacked in the coconut grove that was just north of the airstrip as Division Reserve. Jesus, we saw these two-engine Japanese aircraft coming in very, very low. This was just at twilight. I said, Jesus, what the hell is that? And Walter said, it can't be. It can't be. You could count them. They were coming in from the west, very low. Two-engine aircraft. Holy smokes. And flying over them and performing all kinds of maneuvers with the Japanese Zero float plane. The Zero model. The others, biplanes. 18 we counted. And they came in and bombed bombed Henderson Field, then turned and went over Iron Bottom Sound, turned to your left and started back toward their base, which was up on Gizo Bay. Take me somewhere up in that area. Untold two-engine aircraft. You realize that they were a very good airplane, very maneuverable, but awful slow. And we were so amazed that happened, and how they ever got in. Well, because our planes, a few were on night patrol, and they were way gone. I don't know how they ever. 18 two-winged aircraft with a Japanese Zero float plane, jacking and jigging all over the place, and they bombed. And as they turned, every guy on the ground, I think, whatever weapon they could get, whether it was a 45 or the 03, began firing up just to relieve the tension. You had no more chance to hit them. And the Japanese Zero float plane strafed us. It was that was a humorous. That was something that shouldn't have happened, and it did. I don't remember too many things that made me smile on that island.
Ted, what did you think of officers and of fellow Marines?
They were extraordinary. I was lucky in that circumstance to be with them. We had good officers. I'll tell you another story about an officer. The humanness of war that happens so unexpectedly. We had spent the night on a spur of a ridge, Japanese dead all around us. The stench was unbelievable. In the morning when we left that place, we went down a very steep ravine, crossed the stream, up the other side, out of the jungle, and onto a ridge. We formed in skirmishers and faced to the north. The fight was going on below us. Heavy smoke everywhere. Heavy sound of fighting. behind the Japanese. We'd cut them off. The commanding officer sat on an ammunition box off to our left. All of a sudden, and we were on this ridge and with all the scrub growth down, and then you could see the Iron Bottom Sound and the trail, the east-west trail that ran the length of the island alongside that. Suddenly, I saw a Japanese soldier running. It was close enough so that you could see that his uniform was fresh and he had leggings on. And he was wearing a prize. He was wearing the Japanese slicker. We had ponchos. They had light raincoats. They were a prize to get. I raised the BAR. I figured if I led him by just a little bit that I could take him. And sitting, as I said, on this ammunition box was the commanding officer. I knew his name. His name was Lew Walt. He was a major. Lewis Walt went on to become Commandant of the Marines in Vietnam. Eileen, I think he never was a favorite, I don't believe, of a lot of the Marine brass. I think he was very careful about the lives of his men. And this little thing that I'm going to tell you what happened indicate that to me. Just with bringing up that BAR, so I can get off a burst of maybe 3 and bring him down. Understand, he was the last man running. Walt said, "Put it down, son. You'll have a lot of time for that. There'll be plenty of time for that." And he let him go. He was the last man running. We killed every one of those people in that pocket. About 350 Japanese that we got behind, and they were, other units were pushing them from the front. "Put it down, son. There'll be plenty of time for that." Now, you say, so what? Commanding officer of this unit, wasn't kill. Last man out. The last man out. He was running back because all to the left, all to the west, that was Japanese stuff. That was a place called the Point Cruz Pocket.
Let's pick up where you returned home to the United States. Did you have any leave before you were assigned to Camp Lejeune?
Yes, yeah.
So you were able to come home?
In the summer, within July, holy smoke, I really got to go back.
Shall we break here?
Yeah.